to the Power of One. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Mr. Dave, and we are going to discuss CACs, which is Child Advocacy Centers. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Good. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Dave, I know in my victim services career, only about 2 years ago, did I find out about the CACs and how important they were. How were CACs born, and are they in 50 states? Tell us about the CACs.
Yeah, well, it's a great model. First of all, it's a multidisciplinary approach to handling child abuse, child maltreatment treatment cases, and really, it got its start back in the mid to late 1980s in Huntsville, Alabama, actually, where the first Child Advocacy Center is this National Child Advocacy Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and then a prosecutor by the name of Bud Kramer. He was prosecuting a child abuse case at that point and realized how many interviews a child was having during that child abuse case. Now, I want you to think about this, where child advocacy centers were really formed to handle sexual abuse cases. Now, we've evolved to where we're handling more stuff, and I'll get that in a minute. But you've got a child who typically is having to disclose about their first sexual experience as a child. So that child would have to, where however that disclosure was made. So and most of them are accidental disclosures. But let's say the child told a teacher. Okay, so that's one time, right? So the disclosure has been made once. So now that teacher notifies the authorities, social services, police. Social services does an interview. Police will do an interview. If medical attention is needed, medical practice is going to do an interview. If there's a victim advocate involved, maybe they may ask questions. I don't think that at that point, maybe they would do a full-blown interview. And then mental health, perhaps, if the mental health and treatment is involved. And then if they go to court, you've got a prosecutor, and then you have that child having to tell about that, make that disclosure again in an open court. So that at that time, at that time, prosecutor Bud Kramer said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's how that model evolved, where he created this child advocacy center model where all of these disciplines would come together to interview and investigate that case. So instead of that child having to have 6, 7, 8, multiple interviews where we're re-traumatizing that child, the model says we're going to interview that child, one time, or in certain circumstances, maybe twice. But now we're reducing the trauma of that child having to make that disclosure over and over again. So that's really how the Child Advocacy Center movement was born. And that was, again, back in the late 1980s. So then you start having the evolution of that model catching on across the United States to where we have now over 1,000 child advocacy centers. Every state has a child advocacy center and a state chapter of child advocacy centers. About 85%, closer to 90% of our country has the services available of a child advocacy center. And what we're seeing now is that model really catching on across the globe. Canada has several child advocacy centers. I think they were up the last time I knew were close to 24 child advocacy centers. Mongolia has looked at this. I mean, we can name many, many countries that are looking at this model. And again, it really started investigating sexual child abuse cases. Well, over the last 40 years, we've seen, or 35, almost 40 years, we've seen that evolve to where now they're handling a lot of other child maltreatment, physical abuse, drug endangered, domestic violence witnessing, all that. A lot of our child advocacy centers are handling that across the U.S.
So now break down for viewers what that looks like. So say there is an allegation and someone makes a call. What happens right after that? And then how the team comes together and what that looks like. I mean, I know what that looks like and you know what that looks like,
Sure.
but what that looks like and then with the forensic interviewer.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. So first, there's different models around the country. So I may give you an example of a model, and somebody may say, "Well, that's not how it works in my
Mhm,
community."
mhm,
But the foundation of the Child Advocacy Center world, so to speak, or movement, are all the same. And then how we handle things, certainly in our community, may look a little different. So
mhm,
typically, if a call is made about a child maltreatment case, it's going to end up going to, if it's abuse, it's going to end up going to social services or law enforcement. And that will trigger a response. And at that point, that's when our investigative team, that's social services and law enforcement, are going to come together. They're going to come together and do that investigation together as they walk through that instead of two different parallel investigations. So that information sharing is there. The two heads are better than one. Comes into play there because you have two different experiences, and they're doing the investigative piece. The other disciplines in that are going to come together: that mental health, the medical, the advocacy, and the prosecution. All of that team is going to come together, discuss, and work on that case together as it moves through the system for that family. So you've got the advocacy piece really being the liaison between the family and the Child Advocacy Center and the team so that there's constant, or as much as the family wants, communication. And then that we know. Now, I don't necessarily, so as law enforcement, so that's my background. In law enforcement, in this case, like for a Child Advocacy Center case, um, it was great to have that victim advocate there because they could be that liaison with that family. And I could say to the family advocate when we meet once a week about these cases, I can say, this is where I'm at. This is, you can tell the family this is where, we're progressing so that there's that constant communication. And then the same thing with mental health, medical, our advocacy and prosecution. All of the disciplines are coming together on a routine basis to discuss this case and the progress of this case. Now, a child advocacy center is a child-friendly environment, and again, it will look different in different communities. So, for instance, the one in Philadelphia is very large, great
mhm,
reputation. And I've seen them move for three times, I think, over the course of their history, and it's a beautiful building. Now, if you come to my community where I'm at, you're going to see probably about a tenth of the size of the Philadelphia CAC, and it's a part-time director because it's a rural community.
mm,
And then the team will come to the Child Advocacy Center when there's a case in Philly,
mhm,
and where I originally was a law enforcement above Baltimore, just south of Philly, we were co-located, so we were all together. And so when a case came in, we were all together anyway. I would just
mhm.
walk down the hall and talk to the social service worker and our mental health, etc. So it really depends on that model, how it's coming together. But the foundation is that we are coming together to help, and not only that child, but that family as well. Because thankfully, I can't imagine, but uh, as a child comes to the Child Advocacy Center, it's not just the child that is in trauma at that time; it's the family as well.
Yes. Yeah. hmm It is. So, and again, speaking from experience, because I used to oversee a CAC in Bucks County, which is
Okay.
different
Oh
from
yeah.
Philly, but I'm
Yep.
familiar with the one in Philly. And so they take the child into a room, and it's the child and just the forensic interviewer, and family members cannot go in. And then they're trying to see if something will be disclosed. Now, in the time that I was there, and help me out with this because you were with the national CAC, there were many times when things was disclosed, but I never saw where a child was immediately removed from the home. The investigation would take place and things in that nature. So talk to me about that piece and, the families going home. So, I'm the executive director for Northwest Victim Services. And for me, emergency, immediate, like, come on, let's get them out. And this is how I move. Ooh. So for
Yeah.
me, that's like a little hard. But with that model, I just don't want someone to be placed in harm's way. So speak about that piece.
Yeah. So it's a couple things. I'm going to back up a little bit on that forensic interview piece, if you don't mind. So
Mhm.
we've come so far in the forensic interviewing world, and we learn things by research and practice that sometimes we can do things better. And Having been a forensic interviewer and a trainer for forensic interviewing, now I didn't do as many forensic interviews as you see forensic interviews doing now. But the evolution of that from the 1980s, where we were more of a therapeutic model of interviewing, to now we're a forensic interviewing model of interviewing, has really uh, evolved that forensic interviewing profession. When I first started, so I first started in this field back in the. I'm gonna show my age here. The late 1990s. We were When I first came to the Child Advocacy Center. Again, we're co-located, so I had an office there, and we would get a case. Me and a social worker who was trained in interviewing children, not necessarily forensic interviewing, but interviewing children. We would bring that child into a very small room, about a 10 by 10 room that is sterile. So there's nothing, no distractions for the child. We would bring that child into that room and we would interview that child. Now, typically, I'd sit behind the social worker and take notes while she's doing the talking. Well, back then, that was the best that we knew. However, if you could imagine that child going into a room with two stranger adults, I mean, that's stressful in itself.
Yeah.
The evolution of that now is we have trained forensic interviewers that interview that child by themselves and I've seen different forensic interview rooms models, um, and while the investigative team watches that interview. So Dave, the law enforcement officer, does not interview that child. Melany, you as a victim advocate are not going to interview that child. That we're going to watch that interview being conducted, and then if I have questions for that forensic interviewer relating to the criminal case, then I can communicate with that forensic interviewer in that room, whether it's by phone, whether it's a earbud, or whatever it may be. Um, but we have so evolved from that, and if you're interested in looking at some of the evolution on how we've improved, the Little Rascals Daycare is a great case and example, and you can find this out on the internet. You can look. I think it was in North Carolina, and that model was more of a uh, therapeutic. I wouldn't even say it was therapeutic, but we learned a lot from that case. And when I say we, the field learned a lot from that case. So now, moving on to your other question about kiddos being placed or not going home. The only times that I saw, and it was very rare that happened, because one, we want the child to be with their family. Now, if that child, obviously, the offending caregiver is a parent or a caregiver in the home, then social services is coming up with some type of safety plan. So if and making sure that there's separation not only here but sight of that offender. And the times that I would see a child removed is when the non-offending caregiver was more supportive of the offending caregiver, and there was not a safety place. There was not a safety mechanism in place, whether that's another family member or something else. So I think that it's very rare that a child is removed from a family, and that's an extreme case when a family comes to a child advocacy center. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
It did. It did. And what else I saw often, which was very heartbreaking, and it was a lot of sibling on sibling for sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And then some of the physical and some of the sexual could be parents, but it was more sibling on sibling. When we think about abuse, sexual abuse, and when we talk about it just in as in general, most of the time we're saying to our children or to the young people in our family, you got to watch out for strangers. You watch out for your we're strangers. But usually most of the time when sexual abuse happens, it could be a teacher. It could be a sibling. It could be a parent. It's somebody who's usually very close to us. Speak about that.
Yeah, if you look at statistics, you're going to see that 90 to 9, I think the most recent statistic I saw was 93% of the offenders for child sex abuse cases are known to the victim. Now, I
Mhm.
think that's a little higher, but I'll stick with the statistics. So if you think 90% are known, that means it's a family member, a friend of the family. It could be an extended family, but somehow they know that victim. Now, in my experience, I've handled well over 300 cases myself, and then supervised well over 3,000. And
Mm,
so let's just round it off to 3,500 cases, which is very realistic. I think I can remember two stranger cases.
mm,
So we know, the field knows, research knows that the majority of the time, even more than the majority, almost all of the time, the offender is known to the victim. Now
mhm,
we teach stranger danger. Right? If you
mhm.
remember, everybody knows McGruff the crime dog. Well,
Yeah.
most people know McGruff the crime dog. A little tidbit. I played McGruff the crime dog a couple of times. Anyway, and I could do
Hey.
that. Take a bite out of crime. um,
Oh, we got a celebrity. Okay.
yeah,
I
right.
feel important. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just. But um, we talk about stranger danger. Well, we know again that most of the time the offender is known to the family. So um, what we want to do is we want to eliminate opportunity. And that, whether it's stranger or family, whatever it may be, we want to eliminate opportunity. And I'm going to probably go down a path here, but I'll try to explain. So think of a triangle, and there's three sides to that triangle. Well, typically, if you look at in the law enforcement or crime world, there's we look at this called a crime triangle, and there's three sides to that. There's desire, which I can't really change somebody's desire to commit a
Mhm,
crime. And then there's the means to commit the crime. And I have a hard time being able to take away the means to commit a crime. Well, then the bottom piece of that triangle is opportunity. And that's the foundation of that triangle. Well, if we take that foundation away, you have no triangle, you have no
mm,
crime. So that opportunity piece comes into play, especially with our kiddos, knowing if we all know this, that 90% is going to be by somebody that we know. Well, how do we empower our kiddos to say no or to tell or whatever it may be? Now, the good thing is when we were growing up, we heard a lot of stranger danger, or I can imagine if I came home and said to my parents, "Hey, guess what I learned today in school? That if somebody's going to sexually abuse me, it's probably going to be you all." And I
right.
don't think that, right? I don't think they would handle that very well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're doing better at that now. We've got Aaron's Law. We have other initiatives in schools that are really talking about body safety, empowering our kids to say no, and that's a good thing.
Mhm,
But I get on a soapbox about this because somebody there's no typical sex abuser. Okay,
mhm,
child, there I can't walk down the street and go, that person's a sex abuser, that person's a
mhm,
sex abuser, or that profession is going to be somebody that's going to be a sex abuser. It can be anybody. And I have investigated, you name it, and you've seen it in your child advocacy center. There is no boundary,
right.
economic, profession, gender, I don't care what it is. There's no boundary on somebody. I can never. There's only one person I always say when I do my teachings. I always say there's only one person that I ever trusted, and that was my wife. And because I know her and she's with me. Um, because grandparents can, siblings can, uh, parents can, step parents, you name it. So I
Yeah.
just say, to people that you just have to be careful and eliminate opportunity.
Right. And eliminate opportunity, which I think is very important. So there's this family, which I know and love very much, and they have children. They have three children, a young, a boy, he's 8, and a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter. So mom says to the 8-year-old son, take your sister to the bathroom. The 3-year-old. And see again, and I tell people all the time, I'm damaged. And I'm always like, no, And I said to mom, I was like, listen, okay, he did it this time. Good kid, nothing there. I said, but I really don't think you need to have your 8-year-old taking a 3-year-old female to the bathroom. I think you should do that. And again, it's just me thinking all the time. I'm not saying anything bad about anybody, but see the opportunity. And that 8-year-old, that's first of all, that's not his responsibility, and he shouldn't be doing it in the first place. But again, opportunity. You eliminate all of that opportunity. Tell me, what's the role of the national CAC?
So you have two different things. I want to make sure that we clarify this for your viewers. So you have the National Child Advocacy Center, which is in Huntsville, and that's their title. So just like Philadelphia, just like Bucks
Understood.
County,
Understood.
so
Okay.
they're the first one. So they were the National Child Advocacy Center. They do a lot of training, a lot of good forensic interviewing training. Really a good place. And then you have the National Child Advocacy or National Children's Alliance,
Okay.
NCA. And NCA, excuse me, is an accrediting body for child advocacy centers. So our child advocacy centers, majority of them around the U.S. are accredited, and there are national standards. And it goes back to when I was saying about how we handle things with a foundation. And it may look different in Bucks County than it looks different in Philly or here in Tennessee, where I'm at now. But the foundation are those standards, and those standards can be found on our website or on the National Children's Alliance website, so
Mhm.
you can see those. So there's no legal entity relationship. So the National Children's Alliance doesn't have a child advocacy center. They are the accrediting body and a supporting body, a membership organization for child advocacy centers. So there's a lot of things that the National Children's Alliance will do so that the executive director at Bucks County doesn't necessarily have to do. They can focus their time on helping the kids in that community, where the National Children's Alliance may have training available for the mental health services there. They may be able to provide, policies, or at least look at policies, communications, all that for their membership there. Um, so that's the difference between the National CAC and the National Children's Alliance.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, I thank you so much for all of your education to our viewers. Keep up the good work because it is needed. We have to protect the children. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, and keep up the great work there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. We will protect our children at all costs. No children should be sexually abused, physically abused, or neglected. If you know of that, please call your number in your county to make sure that they are always protected. Peace and love.